The Bayou Bengals, the Rebels, ESPN, 6 o'clock in Vaught Hemingway, Mississippi, Oxford, LSU, -2.5. Over-under set at 67.5. Points shall be scored, says Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas says that points should be scored. Last week's LSU and Arkansas game, where Arkansas performed and LSU underperformed way differently than I would have expected and that I predicted on our podcast, all tells me that points should be scored. Got some concerns for Ole Miss that I didn't think I'd have. I just wonder if they'll ever beat Bama. Saban, especially if I'm Kiffin, just wasn't the performance I expected at all.
Yeah,
almost a little unimaginative. They couldn't give Dart any time. He couldn't make the plays if he did have time. You name it. So everything says that points should be scored in this game. Absolutely.
Is this one of those games for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin that it's not a must win, but it's all right, you lost to Bama, you turn around and lose to LSU. Is the narrative changing on you if you're Lane Kiffin? You know, they're only 2.5 point favorites coming in. It's at home. You know, say LSU comes in and just kind of wipes the floor with them, which is doable. I think it's very, very doable.
Yeah.
I mean, is it just going to be one of those things where people sweep it under the rug and they dismiss it just because it's Lane Kiffin, or is there some heat?
Well, that shouldn't be the outcome. That should not be the outcome because, you know, all the talk about Lane Kiffin, the bright offensive mind that he is, the improvements that Ole Miss has made over time. I mean, they had a decent season last year, and that was coming off of losing Jackson Dart. Excuse me. My gosh, Matt Corral. Excuse me. Coming off of losing that, you know, coming off of a 10-win season, which has been impossible to do there historically. But if things don't catch up to Kiffin eventually, I don't know why not. Because, I mean, you lose to Alabama. You score 10 points against Alabama. The one thing they have been able to do is score points against Alabama, make it a shootout. They couldn't do that. And Alabama's far from their best version. You're talking about hosting Arkansas next week. They've lost that game inexplicably multiple times. Then they travel to Auburn. I mean, the road is going to get very real for them if they – and frankly, I expect them to lose. I don't know what I'll predict in a minute. I haven't really thought that much about it. But if they lose this game, as Vegas expects, when is it going to catch up to Lane Kiffin? Because it seems like people only want to remember the good of Lane Kiffin.
Oh, and there's been a handful of bad.
Yeah.
Almost everybody's beaten Saban at this point.
Ooh, it's getting kind of common these days, isn't it?
I mean, I'm just saying.
Sark's done it.
Yeah. Now, which this leads me to another question. No matter what happens on Saturday, if Ole Miss, you know, tallywhacks LSU or vice versa, is it that the SEC is down? Or is there just way more parity in this conference that we've seen and we can't recognize it anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that may be the case. You know, LSU, I'm not talking about their game against Grambling. I'm more so moving on to Mississippi State. They responded really well against Mississippi State. Obviously, they responded well against Grambling. After a loss to FSU, they didn't lose to Arkansas, but it was right there on the table for them to lose that game at home.
Yeah.
As a not game, as massive favorites.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious how they'll respond after that. I mean, we've talked. That's you know, if there's a theme of our show, today's theme is about the response after a loss or a near loss. In this case, it wasn't actually a loss. So how they'll respond is huge for me because I obviously think there's a path for Ole Miss to win this game. It's at home. It is hard to win on the road in any conference in college football, but I can't really get a grasp of what it means for the conference. The West is like the East used to be when you had Alabama at the top, which is, you know, what Georgia's doing now. And it's like, what the heck is going on down here behind it? Except nobody's there. Like, there's no clear favorite in the West right now.
Absolutely. And if Ole Miss pulls this off, that narrative only grows. There's no clear front runner for the West.
Agreed.
Well, I'm not real sure what else to say on this, so let's get into predictions and final scores and all the fun stuff that people probably fast forward to anyway. So again, LSU -2.5, over under 67.5. What say you?
I'm going to say that and that's a big number. It's not quite Oregon and USC and Colorado, but it's a big number. I'm going to say that gets hit though, because of all the players that will play in this game, Jackson Dart needs a big game. Because watching last week's game, I still don't know all the reasons that it's not Spencer Sanders there. He transfers in. Just like I'm saying for Lane, there's got to be some heat, some noise if you continue to have letdowns in big moments. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say that some points are scored. I'm going to say that Dart does respond, that he secures his job. Could this be where Judkins breaks out? Because Arkansas ran the ball pretty well last week, not only with KJ, which Dart run the ball, but they ran the ball well with, Rocket Sanders backup, Dubinion. So I think that there's going to be some yards, some points. I'm going to say that Ole Miss pulls this out, man, because the noise has to catch up at some point. And that's just kind of where I see things at in the West. I thought LSU was an arm and a leg above anyone and maybe everyone, including Alabama, entering the season. I'm not so sure after the loss to FSU, obviously, as good as they are. The game against Arkansas that I still just can't figure out. Daniels, is he going to turn the ball over tomorrow? I think there's obviously a chance that he could do that. We've seen Ole Miss be stingy with the ball at times, even though they'll give it back to you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say that they pull this game out because of how hard it is to win on the road in this conference at night. Vaught Hemingway is a great place. It's a great venue. So I'm going to say that all those factors, the bounce back is strong enough for Ole Miss to narrowly pull this game out. I'm going to say to the tune of 38, 35, something like that. I mean, right there, I think it's going to be a 30 type of game, maybe low 40s. But I'm going to say they're a field goal, maybe even a touchdown better.
I'm going to say that Lane Kiffin gets it right. I'm going to say that Lane Kiffin rights the ship, that he recovers from the season that has not really gone his way thus far. But I'm going to say that doesn't happen this week. I'm going to take the Tigers 34 and the Rebels 31. I just like and trust the roster and the coaching staff more than I do what I feel like Ole Miss is made up of the playmakers and not the team in an entirety, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because LSU has a squad and some dudes on that squad, and I feel that Ole Miss just has some dudes that are carrying them, if that makes sense. Don't get me wrong. Quinshon Judkins, well, I guess this is my point. This dude, he's just going to cover a multitude of sins. He's going to cover a multitude of sins. And I think Jackson Dart is a really good quarterback. I mean, heck, I took him in that fantasy draft that we did. I really, really like him. But before we get into this and shut this thing down, I just want to say one thing. Just one thing. Spencer Sanders. Worst transfer move I've ever seen. I just don't get it. I get why you got out of Oklahoma State, but I just do not get this move. Nonetheless, he's taking the Rebels. I'm taking the Tigers. It's going to be a barn burner in Mississippi.